So this is kind of very important here. So I want to talk to you now about IRS Form W4, line by line instructions. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back, folks, to another edition of the Awesome Studio Kiwi Show. How are you today? I hope you are doing marvelous. I'm doing fantastic, if you were to ask me. And if you are doing as great as I am, go grab a cup of coffee or tea or vodka and let's roll. In today's conversation, I want to have a serious discussion about Form W4, and I want to give you some line by line instructions. And the W4, and we have the link to that form on the screen right now. This is the IRS link where you get that form. And the W4, in essence, tells your employer how much federal income tax to withhold from each of your paychecks. So the thing here is that what is the W4 and who needs one? The U.S. tax system requires everyone to pay income tax throughout the year by having employers withhold a certain amount from each of their paychecks, right? So this is basically the W4 is a federal tax form that tells your employer how much money to withhold from your paychecks. And the cool thing here is that you want to pay the proper amount of annual tax. And employers will remove a certain tax amount from your paychecks and send it to the IRS in order to pay your federal income taxes throughout the year. And the amount they remove is called your tax withholding. And the IRS Form W4 tells your employer basically how much you are willing to send to the IRS. And the IRS requires every employee to fill out a W4, and your employer probably required you to complete one on your first day at work. So it's very, very important to get your W4 right, because if you want to avoid paying too much or little in tax, you need to put the right info. If you do not withhold enough tax, you will owe a tax bill when you file your tax return. Okay, and withholding too much, on the contrary, you will get a big refund when you file a return, but you could have had bigger paychecks during the year because you didn't have to withhold as much as you did. And the good thing is that you can update the information on your W4 as often as you need to. There is no limit here, and you should generally fill out a new W4 after changes to your financial situation, like let's say you get married, having a child, buying a house, or just after a raise. Many companies now allow you to update your W4 online. So even if your finances don't change, it's kind of cool to check your withholding regularly to ensure that everything is correct. All right, this is very important. One thing I want to say here before closing on this section is that you do not need to send any W4 forms to the IRS. You only need to give it to your employer. Your employer doesn't actually send your W4 to the IRS. It's mostly just for the company's records. So people sometimes talk about W2 and W4. What is really the difference here? Form W2, as I just said, tells your employer how much tax to withhold in upcoming checks, and the W2 tells you how much tax your employer withheld for the past tax year. Let me repeat that, very important. So Form W4 tells your employer how much tax to withhold in upcoming checks, whereas a W2 tells you how much tax your employer withheld for the past tax year. So you complete the W4 and give it to your employer, while the W2 is a form that your employer sends you early in the year to help you file your tax return. And the W2 also lists the total income you earn, how much of your income was subject to tax, and how much tax your employer withheld. So we're showing you right now on the screen, very quickly, we're showing you right now a copy of Form W2. Actually, if you are an employee, you probably know that form already, but if you're not, then it's kind of cool to know how it looks like. And you have several copies. You have copies for the states, the city and local tax department, and you have a copy for also the IRS. You have a copy for the employee. And the thing here is that as we are comparing two tax years, tax year 2020 versus tax year 2019, has the W-4 forms changed at all? Now, the 2020 W-4 form was different from previous years because it actually reflected the changes from the 2017 tax reform. If you remember, the TCJA, that's the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017. So future W-4 forms will also contain these changes. In particular, it got rid of allowances. All right, the notion of allowances. So previously, the amount withheld was determined by the number of allowances you took. If you wanted to make your withholding more precise, you would write in a dollar amount to withhold. The new W-4 form bases your tax withholding on your estimated earnings instead of using allowances. So that's the big distinction to be had. Do you really need a W-4 for state taxes? It really depends. If your state, country, actually not country, your state, county, city, or other local government collects income tax, your employer may require you to complete a tax version of the W-4. And some states also call their form a W-4, but it's distinct from the federal W-4. It really depends on your state. And there are also states that just use the information on your federal W-4 instead of requiring a separate form. So you really want to check with your state or just hire a local accountant or a local tax accountant to kind of help you figure this out. All right. And when should you update your W-4? I think I said earlier that a lot of companies nowadays allow you to update this basically online, right? And I give you a few instances where you need to update your W-4. Now here I'm going to give you all the possible reasons, the long list of reasons, of circumstances, of life-changing events that should trigger an update on your W-4. So, because since your W-4 affects how much income tax you pay, you should check or update your W-4 anytime you experience a big life event. That's the key phrase here, big life event, or when your financial situation changes. It's also a good idea to check your W-4 at the beginning or end of the year. So I'm going to give you right now a few possible reasons to update your W-4. So you have marriage or divorce, the birth or adoption of a child that no longer qualifies as a dependent, you get a second job or you change jobs, you get a raise, you may no longer be withholding enough if you get a raise, right? Your spouse gets a second job, a new job, or a raise, and that's if you file a joint return. You or your spouse is unemployed for any amount of time, you move or buy a house. You can update your W-4 at any time, and you can update it as many times as you want. There's no limit here. And changes may take up to 30 days to take effect. Many employers and HR services allow you to change the form digitally. You can even fax it. You can fax your info to the HR department. I'll be right back. Right after this, I'll go ahead. Welcome back, folks, to another section of the Awesome Studio Kiwi Show. Let's now dig a little deeper into Form W-4, and I'm going to give you line-by-line instructions. Now, this form has 5 sections. The 2021 W-4 has 5 sections, and those are labeled as steps. And basically, each step asks you about different types of income or tax deductions. And you can see on the screen right now, I want you to pay attention on the screen right now. So you can determine how much your employer should withhold for each item. Not everyone has to fill out every part of the W-4 though. So everyone has to fill out steps 1 and 5, but not everyone has to fill out 2 through 4. So to make the W-4 process easier, you want to first have last year's tax return on hand, assuming your tax situation is similar to last year's. All right, so you can see here on step 1, you want to enter your personal information. Straightforward. So you have your name, address, social, tax filing status. Step number 2, this is for joint filers and people with multiple jobs. So you only need to complete step 2 if you have more than one job, or if you're married, filing jointly with the spouse who also works. So completing this step is potentially the most complicated, but it ensures you withhold enough tax to cover all of your income. There are three possible ways to fill out step 2. They are labeled as a 2A, 2B, and 2C, but you only need to do one of them. So step 2A, you want to use the IRS Withholding Estimator app, and this is on the internet, to determine how much tax to withhold per pay period. And honestly, based on our research, this is generally the easiest method. Step 2, instead of using the app, you can fill out the multiple jobs worksheet on page 3 of the W4 instructions. And this step kind of requires you to look up your income in a table and then divide the table value by the number of your annual pay period, right? For example, a job that pays every other week would have 26 pay periods. And if you have multiple jobs with a salary above 120,000, or if you have income from more than 3 jobs, you will also need to reference the withholding tables in IRS Publication 505. Step 2C here. If you have only 2 jobs, including if you have one and your spouse has one, and they both have similar salaries, you can check the box in step 2C without having to do any of the things in step 2B and 2C. One thing I want to say here is that you make sure you check this box for each job's W4. And if you use step 2 or 2C, step 2B or 2C, the result will go on line 4C later in the form. So your result is the total amount of is basically the total amount to withhold per paycheck, and essentially the IRS suggests writing this number on the W4 of the highest paying job. Step 3, this is where you claim dependents. As you can see on the screen here, we're showing you on the screen. So complete step 3 only if you have dependents and if you are either a single filer with an income of 200,000 or less, or if a joint filer with an income of 400,000 or less. In other words, this step applies to people who qualify for the child tax credit, the CTC, or the credit for other dependents. So step 4, you want to make adjustments if necessary. So this step has 3 parts that allow you to actually withhold any extra tax if necessary. So in this case, if you completed step 2A or 2B, you'll then write your result on 4C. Do you see that here? Right? And most other tax filers don't need to use step 4. So step 4A allows you to withhold income tax for any other taxable income you have outside of your jobs, such as interest, dividends, and retirement income. So if you expect to earn more than $1,000 of untaxed income, you may need the step. Otherwise, you may need to pay estimated taxes every quarter. So that was for step 4A. Step 4B allows you to adjust your income tax withholdings based on any deductions you plan to claim. And this is very important. And this step mostly applies to people who itemize deductions instead of taking the standard deduction, but you may also want to use it if you want to claim any of the deductions on Schedule 1, like for example the student loan interest deduction, and you want to fine-tune also your withholding to maximize the size of your paychecks. Step 4C is where you enter any amount you want your employer to withhold from each of your paychecks. And basically, if you completed step 2A or 2B, you want to write your results here. Step 5 is pretty straightforward here. You have to sign and date the form before returning it to your employer. And if your employer lets you complete your W4 digitally, you will probably be able to use an electronic signature instead of having to print and sign. And remember, there is also a box in step 5 for your employer to sign. And your employer has to put the name and address, the first date of employment, and the EIN of the employer, the employer's identification number. All right, folks, this is it for today's conversation. So the key takeaways here as we went through this IRS Form line W4, IRS Form W4, line by line instructions. The key takeaways are very simple. So your W4 tells your employer how much income tax to remove from your paychecks so you don't owe a tax bill or get a giant tax refund. It's all about optimizing your paychecks. You want to update your W4 whenever your financial or personal situation changes if you have a big life event. You can also calculate your W4 whenever you want and as many times as you want. And the new W-4 has 5 steps, but not everyone needs to complete all the steps. It really depends on your situation. And the one thing I also want to say here is that remember that you can actually update your W-4 digitally. It's very different from your W-2. The W-4, through the W-4, you tell your boss, I mean, not your boss, your employer, your company to withhold a specific amount of money to send to the IRS. And the W-2 at the end of the year actually tells you how much you made during the year, how much you earn in income during the year. So those are two different documents. All right, here is a recap here, folks. I spoke to you about what a W-4 is and who needs one. What is the difference between Form W-4 and Form W-2? How did the 2020 W-4 change from the 2019 W-4? Do you need a W-4 for state taxes? When you should update your W-4? And how do you fill out a W-4 through the 5 steps? Enter your personal information. If you are a joint filer, and for joint filers and people with multiple jobs, if you want to claim dependents, if you need to make other adjustments if necessary, and where you need to sign the documents. Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate it. I will see you next time. But until then, remember, stay marvelous.